Move around here to the back of the system where there are 4 Phillips screws. Start loosening them and then hold the power supply inside. Again, you do not want it to drop and damage components on the inside of the system. And now the power supply can come towards the front of the computer. And out. Once the power supply is out of our way, we can now see a number of these cables. Earlier I told you about, on the front, my card reader, USB port, down here sound and USB ports. The back side of these are those. This is one of the things that I would strongly encourage you to document each of these cables, where it originates, and then where it terminates on the motherboard. Even go so far again, as I showed earlier, to draw on a simple piece of paper a sketch of the motherboard, maybe show the location of the front, the back, and the processor, and then identify those connectors. You might also, of course, have the documentation for the motherboard, and you wouldn't need to do that in the event that you were not able to realign those properly. I'm going to disconnect those in just a moment, but it'd be a little easier to get to them, especially down here at the bottom of the motherboard, if I begin removing some of these cards that are plugged into slots. I actually have a total of 3 cards plugged in, a PCI card, another PCI card, and this one is actually in a PCI-X card. Newer motherboard, newer technology. Now to remove these is going to be slightly different from the previous system. On the previous system, at the top of each one of these cards right up here, there was a screw that anchored those cards into the sheet metal chassis. But of course there is no screw there. It's actually a single plate holding all of them on the outside. So let's turn it around and I'll show you the back side of the system. And what you have is this plate is anchored by that screw right there. And this plate is sitting on top of, turn it around a little bit further so you can see. It is sitting on top of, there you go, each of those cards holding them in place. So I'm going to take my screwdriver and release this plate. Actually, that screwdriver's handle's a little bit wide. Let's try this one. There we go. Whoops. Reaching around from behind. I went the wrong direction. I was tightening it. There we go. Now let me show you how the plate comes off. Here and here is where metal tabs, I just dropped it, didn't I? Well, it's right down there on the floor, and it fits into this, and it sits down on the top of each of the 4 cards. Now, I can go back into the inside of the system and right down here at the bottom is where each of these cards are. The largest one is probably going to be the easiest one to remove first. It's actually fairly long, and as I mentioned to you once before, make sure that one hand is on the outside pushing against the metal plate. The other hand is against the edge so that you do not damage components. And notice I'm walking it straight up in that fashion. And then I can come straight out with this PCI card in one of those white slots. The next one, which is down near the very bottom, this one right down here, whoops, I'm sorry, had my hand on the metal plate that fills the hole, and right beside it is this card. Bring that up and come out. And the last one I'm going to bring out is the PCI X card. It's actually a very short card. It's a card that probably only has 1 or 2 channels, even though it is sitting in a 16-channel slot. Let's start first with the card. Notice right down here at the bottom where the gold contacts are, and this is a functional card, so I'm not going to touch them. Remember, don't do that. On either memory or on the cards, adapter cards that go in the slots, don't touch the gold contacts. So this is a PCI X, and if you notice how short the contacts are here, this is probably only a 2-channel. The type of card it happens to be is evidenced by the SATA connectors. In other words, I could add SATA drives cabled onto this card and add additional storage in the chassis. Let's take a look at the actual slots themselves. Right down here at the bottom, of course, is the PCI slot, and the other 2 are down below it, but this is the PCI Express. It's not the AGP, and it simply isn't a matter of the fact that it's not brown, but I think you can actually see right just beyond the tip of my finger printed on the board, PCI Express. So this does have a 16-channel PCI Express card slot on this motherboard. What you might notice is missing is an AGP slot. We do not have AGP. So for this higher-end system, if you wanted a very fast video, you would get a PCI Express instead of AGP. I'm going to go ahead and move these cables down here at the bottom out of our way. To be honest with you, I've already drawn what I need as far as reminders of where everything's going. The topmost, which is the one running out to my card reader, is the connector closest to the front, and it happens to be a black connector. The next of the cables is coming from the sound and USB. It's near the back, and one of these is a yellow connector right at the very back. In this particular case, the black wire is closest to the back of the chassis, and here near the front is going to be the white. Immediately adjacent to it is another small wire. Also, it's a single wire that goes up to that same collection of the sound and chip reader. And then the final of the wires is this lowest one, and that's going to be going out to my, let's trace that one back out, and that's going to 2 USB ports on the front. One other wire that is down here at the bottom of the motherboard is this one, multicolored wire. This multicolored wire here goes out to the power switch LEDs at the front of the system. It's in a black connector right near the very front edge of the motherboard. Now we can see our motherboard. We're getting ready to remove the motherboard, and in this particular case, the heatsink and fan assembly sitting on top is different from the last one. There are no screws that go all the way down into the sheet metal, so I can take this motherboard out as it is with the memory still installed and with the fan heatsink assembly still on the processor. The one thing I do want to do is this right here. This is a power cord going to this fan. Notice the fan is immediately adjacent to the processor, which has its own fan. So for extra cooling, a second fan, in addition to the one that is in the power supply, is connected to the motherboard. I'll follow that one. It comes around over here, up very close to the processor. believe that's correct. Nope, I'm sorry. It fooled me. Looking over the top from behind, this actually comes down to the motherboard here. This set of wires is for the fan on top of the heatsink, and it goes down to the motherboard. So let's disconnect this. And now I can begin the process of removing the motherboard. Now there are a number of screws that would normally be in this system, but for the sake of time, I've actually removed some of them. There's one missing here, one up here, one back in the corner. I actually only left 3 screws still on the motherboard to make it a little bit easier for the sake of our video training.